Good day, my name's Graham. I'd like to explain some things they don't seem to want to tell people about China. And I often think now that the way China is developing, many Western countries are jealous of the way China's government is able to direct policy without influence from the IPCC or the UN or the EU, and just get on with developing their own country in their own way, and as they say, the Chinese style. Now, there's a lot of myths told and there's a lot of fears fed into the West about China that are patently, well, there to create fear. The West needs Western politics now needs fear about climate change, or fear about inequality, or fear about something or other, or fear about communism, or fear about fear about China. China's ascendancy. It needs to have these fears then to allow the legislators to pass legislation that then grants millions and millions of dollars for various factions. And that's what it is really. I mean, the thing that they don't, if you understand the history of China, China has never been a provocateur of violence in its life, in its history. And it's got a policy, the Chinese got a policy that they will never hit first. And that alone should suggest that, yes, they may defend their territory with their shipping, but no more than, say, America would if China sailed its fleet along the Californian coast or into the Gulf of Mexico. The Americans would be also carrying on, and look, they're invading our space. So there's a lot of propaganda against China, and China's not a perfect place. Of course, no place is perfect because humans are not perfect. But nonetheless, the myths told about China in the West shows that the West relies on ignorance about other people and creates racism towards other people for its own political agendas and whatever they are. And these days, because the West has lost the plot, lost its economic plot, because of the divisions between two parties. I'm not against two-party system, just against the fact they both work together to undermine the economy of the people, and they create massive amounts of debt for the people whilst destroying the means of productivity at the same time by then offshoring all the manufacture, then blaming China. The Americans in particular, during the Clinton era, they offshored most of their manufacture to China because it gave the executives who still own the names of these companies, then made much greater profits, while they made a lot of American workers redundant. And now the Americans are blaming China for doing the manufacturing that they asked them to do. It's as simple as that. And then what the West has done, especially in Australia, which is a basically almost failing system, regardless if it likes to admit it or not, they've shoved the price of electricity up so high, pretending to be doing something about climate, and that's all it is. It's a pretense. Australia pretends it's acting on climate by shoving up the cost of electricity so much it can't even produce its own fuels on land. It can't even produce its own fuel supply because the government is so incompetent here in Australia. I can't speak for America in that regard, because at least Americans look after themselves as far as fuel's concerned. In Australians, they've gone against their own country. Whereas in China, they're not going against their own people. Regardless, they may have some restrictions on speech. But we have, it's the same, and I spent a year in China teaching in China. Not once did I find my speech was restricted. But I'm not into actually insulting people, their personalities, like in the West now it's all about insulting personalities. I like to describe things intellectually and academically and have proper logical and rational discussions with people impartially, so then you're actually having an engaging time with people you may be having supper with or going out to drinks with, which I did on many occasions with the Chinese people and with the Chinese Communist Party who run the university I was in. Now, they call it a communist party, but actually Chinese people, the name Communist Party sticks with them, but it's not actually communism as such, because the Chinese people are the hardest working people on the planet, and the hard work itself denotes capital. A person, individual, struggling into the challenge that there is a massive challenge for people in China. It's not easy, like they have it in the West. It's not easy. They're actually kids and students and schools must work really, really hard to get ahead. There's a massive amount of competition, and the challenge amongst them is to do better than each other. We have a challenge in the West to do worse than each other. There's no challenge in the West anymore because they want everyone to be equal, and anyone who says wants to be better than someone is sort of put, anyone with original idea in the West anymore is sort of put down as being a cut above the rest, or in Australia, as they call it, a tall poppy. Anyone with an original idea in Australia is chopped down as a tall poppy, because in Australia in particular, they do not like original ideas, innovative thinkers. In America they do. And that way there's a difference between America and Australia. But in China now, because of the massive amount of competition and the challenge it's put itself against the rest of the world, is to create within itself a competition between people trying to reinvent technology. Not that the Chinese are the inventors of technology itself. They do make the mistake of giving themselves loose face, if you like, by stealing other people's intellectual property, which is I find that part of China is something that's hard to come to terms with. And I spoke to them. I did openly speak about this, and they've got their own philosophy about this. The most important thing was to make money, not care how you made it. It was to some of them. This is just an honest appraisal about China. But nonetheless, there's something about China that most of the world seems to miss, and this is that China itself is a religion. Being Chinese itself, it's such an old established idea or idiom, way of being. It's genetically programmed into the people to be what they are. Have a look. Most of them look like Chinese, aren't they? They look like what they are. They look like Chinese. So therefore, you can see there's genesis there. Genesis of, sorry, tongue-tied there for a moment. A genesis of some sort of culture, which is an organic culture. It's not just the Chinese food and writing and all that, which is a culture. It's organic within them. It's within their DNA to be Chinese, and that is therefore it's something they truly believe in above all else. That is their religion. And you've got people saying, well, they're not allowing the Muslims to practice their religion in China. Well, actually, they do. They don't persecute Muslims themselves. There's plenty of Muslims out living happily in China. They don't like the idea of preachers and imams propagating a caliphate all over the world, which then threatens China's sovereignty. Whereas in the West, we're sort of bend over merchants, if you like, to these imams, and we allow them to come in our country and preach hatred towards us and propagate the idea that one day Islam will rule the world and rule all the Western countries. And you've got to take, if it's in the idea of equality, China surely has got the equal right as Islam to assert its culture and its religion, which is being Chinese. The thing about China, though, that I have to say I've got an awful lot of respect for, is one, it's extremely philosophical when you get there. You can have brilliant philosophical conversations with almost anyone, which you can no longer do in the West, because that's basically banned. Philosophy now in the West, Plato, Socrates, are banned. Darwin, Adam Smith, banned in the West discussing those things. So therefore the limitation on freedom of speech is more profound now in the West than it has been in China for many, many years. The restrictions in China are on things what they think undermines their morality on corrupts the young, which is any parent must sort of agree with that, rather than this propagation with what they're having in the West now, which is undermining the civility and morality and moral principle within society to basically undermine the culture of the West. But the Chinese are asserting that they are Chinese and they have these moral principles they live by. And if you go there, you come away with enormous amount of respect that's what it's like. They have a moral principle, and it's not perfect. Of course, there's corruption and crime everywhere. The thing about the Chinese is they understand what evolution is, and they understand the most important thing about this. They understand that evolution can be two things: recessive and negative, therefore creating a genetic retardation within society, which is exactly what's happening in the West. Many people in the West don't deny the idea of revolution, or don't want to admit it, or don't understand it, but it's being used in a profoundly regressive way against Western society, where in the Chinese people, the Chinese authorities and government and whatever they are, people selected because of their brilliance to advise governments, understand this profound understanding, and they understand that the best way for humans to progress is through the forge of challenge, the challenge in the classroom. No computers, use your own brain, use your own mind, learn to write, learn to read, learn to add up, learn to do maths and science. Learn and challenge against other people. You've got to be better than other people. Advances humanity, and it advances the capital intentions of China, because that's how you build your capital up, is how you build the intellectual ability within your people. And that's how China is actually got it. China, you are amazed at the fabulous development there, where if you're in Australia you think, well, there's been nothing happening here forever. They just argue about nothing, nefarious ideas about equality and climate change and anything other than tackle the serious problems that the government's caused here for the ordinary people in the economy by messing around with the cost of energy, pretending to doing something about climate when it's actually impossible, because the amount of growth in China alone, regardless how it's grown, or the amount of growth in China alone, means they far outweigh any attempt by Australia to pretense, if you like, just a pretense that's doing something about climate change. It's an abysmal affront to anyone who loves free speech and loves the West and loves the fact that we ought to be talking about things intellectually and freely and rationally, that we're no longer allowed to, because the West is no longer a free speech realm, and it's proven every time anyone speaks these days that all they do is attack people personally. Well, in China, you have to discuss things intellectually, and I think that's a better way of having free speech. Discussing things intellectually and academically and rationally is a better way of having free speech than doing it in the West, where you just attack people personally. But the best part about being in China is the way they deal with things like the physical problems, like your back problem, and the physio they have there is far, far, far superior to anything that we have in the West. And I must say, the year I spent in China, they saved my life by showing me how to treat my own back problems, where before that, I think I wouldn't be alive anymore if I'd have stayed in Australia and not sought better treatment elsewhere. So anyone at all who likes to find out the truth, they're far better off going and spending some time in China for themselves and searching for themselves, and not believe any propaganda there in the media or by anyone about China, because unless you've been there and spent some time there really and done some study of its history and what it's gone through, you have no idea what you're talking about. And neither do most of the media in the West anyway, which basically writes propaganda and nonsense rather than actually express any rational, logical or intellectual opinion, because the Western media anymore no longer serves the purpose of what media should do, but serves the purpose of an elite, the corrupt and the incompetent, trying to bring down the West. The West is a problem within itself. China's not a problem for the West. We should be allied with China, but it's doing it. We should be learning from why is it growing and developing its country and desert and creating forests in the desert where we're pretending all the time about everything. Ask yourself why. Because no, we are not allowed the free speech anymore in the West would advance our societies. It's all about regression. Progress is not all becoming gay and gender neutral. That's not progress. Progress is not letting millions of immigrants, non-productive immigrants, into your country. That's not progress. That's retardation and recessive. This is the cost factors that then you cannot pay off. You've got more and more debt. So we should respect those countries, and equality says China's got equal right to assert its religious sovereignty which is being Chinese as anyone else on earth. Thank you.